Okay, so what if the path to healing from some really deep trauma wasn't just about talking things out, but about playing? It sounds a little out there, right? But today, we're going to explore a really groundbreaking therapy for women who've survived intimate partner violence. It actually uses collaborative storytelling and role-playing games to help rebuild lives. So let's get into how this whole thing works.
So to really get why these new approaches are so vital, we have to start with a pretty sobering reality. I mean, just look at this number. The World Health Organization tells us that nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence from an intimate partner. Let that sink in for a second. 1 in 3. We're talking about a staggering global health crisis.
And, the impact goes way beyond just the physical harm. The psychological wounds, the invisible ones, are just so profound. We're talking about long-lasting trauma, the kind that can lead to PTSD, to deep depression and anxiety. This kind of experience can completely disrupt a survivor's sense of who they are, their sense of safety in the world. It makes it incredibly difficult to trust people again, and often leads to this really intense social isolation.
All right, so what makes healing from this specific kind of trauma so incredibly challenging? Well, let's take a look at some of the hidden barriers that really stand in the way.
You hear that question all the time, right? Why don't they just leave? But it's so much more complicated than that. The hidden barriers are just immense. Survivors often face this crushing wall of shame and guilt, this constant fear of being judged or, even worse, not being believed. Then there's the financial dependence, the economic control that can trap someone, and of course, the very real fear of retaliation, for themselves or for their kids. On top of all that, the abuser often works to create this bubble of social isolation, deliberately cutting them off from anyone who could help.
So when you look at all those complex barriers, it starts to make sense why traditional talk therapy might not always be enough. I mean, it can be hard to even get to, and it might not hit on those really deep-seated issues of isolation and that feeling of having lost all control, all your agency. But what if there was another way? What if healing could be found in, well, the last place you'd probably ever expect? A game.
And that's what brings us to this really innovative idea. It's about taking something like a tabletop role-playing game and using it as a formal, legitimate therapeutic tool. Yeah, it's got a bit of a long name, Therapeutically Applied Tabletop Role-Playing Games, or TTRPGs for short. And what that really means is, you take the mechanics of a game you might have heard of, like Dungeons & Dragons, but you adapt them. You put them inside this structured, clinician-guided framework that's been specifically designed to help support trauma recovery.
And this is a really important distinction to make. This is not just your regular game night. On one hand, you have a recreational game where the goal is just entertainment, right? It's led by a game master, and it's all about fun and telling a cool story. But on the other hand, in a TTRPG, the goal is completely different. It's intentional healing. And instead of a game master, it's led by a licensed clinician whose entire job is to ensure psychological safety. The focus shifts from escapism to actually building real-life skills and processing trauma.
Okay, so the big question is, how? How does playing a character in some fantasy world actually lead to real-world psychological change? It sounds a little like magic, but there's a real method to it. Let's break down the mechanics behind the magic.
So this whole process is really built on 4 key pillars. First up is something called imaginative distance. Okay, think about it like this. Confronting a traumatic memory head-on can be way too overwhelming. But exploring those same feelings of powerlessness through a character who's, say, facing down a dragon, that creates a safe buffer. It lets you process the emotion without being re-traumatized. The second pillar is about reclaiming your story. It helps survivors reshape their own internal narrative from a safe distance. Third, it's basically a practice space. It's a low-stakes environment where players can rehearse things like being assertive or setting boundaries without real-world consequences. And finally, number 4, the game is collaborative by nature. It helps rebuild the very trust and social connections that trauma so often tears apart.
Okay, so to see how all this actually works in practice, let's walk through a fictional case study from the research. This really brings these concepts to life.
So the whole setup for this therapeutic game is this really powerful metaphor. The group's shared mission is to restore light to a village shrouded in magical fog. And that fog, as you can probably guess, represents the isolation, the confusion, and the despair that's caused by trauma.
And here's where it gets really clever. This is the key mechanic. Each player's character is carrying a lantern. And that lantern only gets brighter when the character does something specific, an act of courage, a moment of clarity, or setting a firm boundary. See how that works? The therapeutic goal is literally baked right into the rules of the game.
So picture this.
In one session, there's a participant who really struggles with minimizing her own needs in real life. But in the game, she speaks assertively through her character. And what happens the moment she does that? The fog parts. It's symbolic for sure, but it's such a powerful, immediate victory that connects her action directly to a positive result.
Then later on, you have another player. Her whole life, she's had a history of putting everyone else first. In the game, she faces a choice. Does she heal her own wounded character, or does she use her turn to protect the rest of the party? And she actually pauses, she checks in with herself, and she makes the choice to heal her own character first.
And her reflection after the game, well, it just says everything. She said, "It felt foreign yet freeing to let my needs matter." That one little choice in a game becomes this huge moment of real-world insight. That's empowerment right there.
So, an approach like this, it doesn't just give therapists a new tool for their toolkit. It really asks all of us to rethink some pretty fundamental ideas about what adult therapy and healing can even look like.
For one thing, it completely challenges that old idea that play is just for children. It's not. And for adults who might find traditional talk therapy really difficult or disconnected, these games offer an alternative that's actually engaging and culturally relevant. It meets people where they are, using formats sometimes called geek therapy that actually align with what they're already interested in.
Now, of course, it's important to have a balanced perspective here. This isn't some magic bullet. While this approach is amazing for fostering agency and connection, it definitely has its challenges. I mean, some adults might just see play as childish and resist it. And the facilitators, they need this really unique mix of skills. They have to be a great clinician and a great game master. And this is the most important part. Without the right safety protocols, there is a very real risk of re-traumatization. The entire process has to be what we call trauma-informed, which means it's built from the ground up to keep people safe and prevent any further harm.
When you get down to it, this method really empowers survivors to do more than just tell their stories of trauma. It helps them become the heroes of brand new ones. And that leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. Could the future of healing actually lie in our ability to play?